For 40 years, I believed my life was a story written in quiet, predictable chapters. A loving husband, a kind son, a peaceful home filled with books and the scent of earth from my garden. I never imagined the final chapters would be about betrayal, or that the truth could hide for so long in the places we feel safest. The morning I drove my daughter-in-law, Clara, to her appointment, the world still felt steady. The soft rumble of the car, the classical melody from the radio, it was our familiar rhythm. In the passenger seat, Clara gently rested a hand on her still small bump. I couldn't sleep again, she said, her voice tinged with weariness. Let's just go to your husband's clinic. I trust family more than any big city hospital. Her words warmed me. Family was our anchor. Why would I question it? We arrived at my husband Michael's private practice, a place that smelled of antiseptic and old magazines, a smell that had been part of my life for decades. The waiting room was crowded. Children fussed, a television murmured, and I found the last empty seat beside a pale, tired-looking young woman. We exchanged a sympathetic smile. When she dropped her magazine, I bent to pick it up, a simple act of kindness. But as we chatted about the unseasonable heat and the dreadful cooking show on TV, her smile vanished when I mentioned I was soon to be a grandmother. Her eyes flicked to the closed office door where Michael and Clara had disappeared. Then she leaned in, her voice a hushed, urgent whisper that would crack my world open. That doctor, what is he to you? I smiled politely, still unaware of the storm gathering. Why, that's my husband, and the young woman is my daughter-in-law. The stranger, Lucy was her name, looked around cautiously. The noise of the room seemed to fade away as she leaned even closer, her next words delivered with a chilling clarity. Are you absolutely certain the child she carries is your grandchild? Gentle fade to a close-up of hands nervously clutching a purse. A moment ago, when you stepped out, I heard her call him, my love. Those two words, my love, landed not in my ears, but directly in my soul. A sharp, silent explosion. The warm paper cup I held slipped from my fingers, coffee spreading like a dark stain on the linoleum floor. My happiness, my certainty, seemed to drain away with it. I was frozen, staring at that wooden door. Memories, once sweet, now rushed forward with a terrible new clarity. My husband, Michael. Not the strained man in the white coat today, but the man I'd known for a lifetime. The respected community doctor who read thick medical journals under the lamplight, his glasses slipping down his nose, a symbol of steadfastness. And our son, Thomas, quiet, thoughtful, a writer lost in worlds of his own making. He'd come to us months ago, face ashen, to confess Clara was pregnant. It was a mistake, he'd stammered. After David's birthday party, I had too much to drink. I have to take responsibility. Clara had stood behind him, weeping softly, so fragile. My mother's heart had swelled. I embraced them both. We would make this right. But now, I remembered Michael's reaction that day. No joy, no congratulations. Just a heavy, dreadful silence before he wordlessly climbed the stairs to his study and shut the door. At the time, I told myself he was just in shock. Now, I wasn't so sure. How many signs do we choose not to see, telling ourselves we're being foolish? How often do we mistake silence for strength? His eyes finally found mine across the room. It was like watching a man receive an electric shock. Panic flashed across his face before he could hide it. He cleared his throat, subtly shifting away from Clara's hand. Mom, did you wait long? Clara was suddenly beside me, all sweet concern. Your dad checked on his little grandson so thoroughly, she emphasized the words, dad and grandson, and each one felt like a tiny pinprick. I said nothing. I just looked at my husband, my gaze cold and questioning. For the first time in 40 years, he could not meet my eyes. He fumbled with a folder, his voice a hollow monotone. Here are the results. Don't forget the prenatal vitamins. Clara took the ultrasound image with a proud smile, holding it up like a cherished prize. Look, Mom, Thomas's baby. So healthy. Thank goodness, I forced myself to look at the grainy black and white shapes, but my mind was whirring, a single thought cutting through the chaos. I needed proof. Oh, how clumsy of me, I said, gesturing to the spilled coffee. Clara, dear, could you fetch some napkins from the restroom? I think there's a full roll, she agreed cheerfully and hurried off. As Michael turned to call for a cleaner, my eyes, sharpened by a sudden, desperate clarity, scanned the top corner of the ultrasound sheet left on the chair. There, in small, typed letters, estimated gestational age, 12 weeks for days. 12 weeks and for days, the numbers hung in the air. David's birthday party the night. Thomas confessed his mistake was exactly 8 weeks and 2 days ago. I remembered because our wedding anniversary was the next day. The math was simple, brutal, and undeniable. A 4-week difference. This child could not be my son's. The realization was a physical blow, a sledgehammer of pain to my chest. Clara returned, all efficiency, and I handed back the ultrasound with a smile that felt like a crack in porcelain. He's precious, I heard myself say. He has Thomas's profile. The lie came easily, frighteningly so. A mother's love, it seems, can forge a mask of steel when her child is in danger. The drive home was a fog. Clara chattered about baby names, Noah for a boy, Amelia for a girl, and nursery colors. I replied with vacant hums, my hands clenched on the steering wheel, knuckles white. I was navigating two roads at once, the familiar highway home and the terrifying, uncharted path my life had just veered onto. The silence in the car as we pulled into the garage was suffocating, broken only by the soft clack of the cooling engine. Clara went inside, but I remained, gripped by a stillness that felt like the calm before a terrible storm. I sat there a long while, staring at the familiar dashboard, breathing in the scent of old leather and my own shattered peace. That evening's meal was the heaviest I have ever served. The air in our dining room was thick enough to choke on. I dished out my son Thomas's favorite chicken and mushroom soup, a recipe from my own mother, but its comforting aroma now turned my stomach. Thomas, bless his innocent heart, was the only one untouched by the gathering clouds. He spoke animatedly about his latest manuscript, his eyes alight with creation. He even served Clara a tender piece of chicken with such gentle care. Eat, my dear. You're eating for now. Clara accepted it with a radiant smile, but it was a performance. The instant Thomas looked down at his own plate, I saw her gaze slide across the table toward Michael. It was a look loaded with meaning, secretive and bold, a signal. Have you ever watched someone you love, sitting right beside you, become a stranger in the blink of an eye? And Michael, my husband of 4 decades, he was a ghost at his own table. He kept his eyes fixed on his plate, eating without tasting, speaking not a single word. His silence was a chilling void, louder than any confession. It was the silence of guilt, and it filled the room like a fog. Then, as if the last thread of his composure snapped, his fork slipped from his fingers. The sound of metal striking ceramic was a sharp, shocking crack in the quiet room, cutting off Thomas's cheerful talk mid-sentence. We all jumped. Michael flushed a deep red, fumbling to pick it up, muttering an apology. I watched it all. Clara's knowing glance, Michael's unraveling nerves. My soul felt encased in ice. This was no longer a family dinner. It was a silent trial, and I was the only one who knew the crime that hung in the air between us. After the plates were cleared, Thomas kissed Clara's forehead and retreated to his study, to the safe world of his words. Clara yawned, declaring her tiredness, and went upstairs. Soon, the sound of running water from the shower echoed through the house. I knew my moment had come. The time for watching was over. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I turned and walked slowly toward the bedroom I shared with the man who was now a mystery. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. He was standing with his back to me at the open window, a thin plume of smoke curling out into the dark night. He was smoking, a habit he had given up 20 years ago, the day Thomas graduated. The sight of that cigarette told me everything I needed to know. His conscience was a raging fire he could no longer contain. I didn't hesitate. I didn't have the strength left for patience. I walked to the dresser and set down my cell phone, the screen already illuminated. On it was the photograph I had taken of the ultrasound, the damning numbers clear. 12 weeks and 4 days, I said. My voice was terrifyingly calm, as if reporting the weather. David's birthday party was 8 weeks and 2 days ago. Explain this to me, Michael. He flinched. The cigarette tumbled from his fingers, scattering glowing embers on the Persian rug. He stomped them out clumsily, like a boy caught in a misdeed. These estimates, they can be off by a week or two, Mary. Medicine isn't an exact. Don't, I interrupted, my voice still even but now edged with a deadly frost. You are a doctor. A 4-week margin of error is impossible. Tell me the truth. That child is not Thomas's, is it? A silence descended, dense and heavy. Michael stopped his fumbling. His shoulders, usually so square and dependable, slumped as if an invisible weight had finally crushed him. Slowly, he nodded. That single, silent admission confessed more than any speech. When the foundation of your life crumbles, what do you hold on to? Is it memory or the painful new reality? He sank onto the edge of our bed, the same bed we'd shared for 40 years, and buried his face in his hands. When he spoke, his words were rough, rehearsed a script of excuses. She came to me. Clara did. She confessed she'd been with another man before, that he'd abandoned her when he learned of the pregnancy. She was terrified, desperate. She clung to Thomas as a lifeline. How could I break our boy's heart, Mary? I only wanted to protect this family. He looked up then, his eyes pleading and wet. He was trying to wear the mask of the noble patriarch, burdened by a secret to spare his son. But I was no longer the woman who believed every story. Protect the family? Or protect yourself, Michael? I kept my gaze locked on his. Today, at the clinic, a young woman sitting next to me heard my daughter-in-law call my husband my love. Those 2 words tore down every fragile wall you've built. The color drained from his face. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The dignified doctor vanished, leaving only a terrified, exposed man. His shoulders crumpled completely, and then he wept. Not tears of remorse, but desperate, choking sobs of a trapped creature. And between those sobs, the horrible truth finally spilled out. He confessed to everything. The secret relationship that began under our own roof. The visits Clara made to see Thomas, which were really aimed at him. The weakness of an older man for the calculated flattery of a younger woman. But the most appalling admission was still to come. He admitted he had been an active participant in Clara's cruel plan. On the night of that fateful party, it was he who had encouraged Thomas to drink more, and later, it was he who had guided his own intoxicated, unconscious son to the bedroom where Clara was waiting. I swear to you, Mary, he sobbed, sliding to his knees on the rug, his hands clutching at my legs. Thomas was in a deep sleep. He never touched her. We only staged a scene. He knelt there, a broken man, begging for forgiveness with tears and ragged breaths. But all I felt was a cold, vibrating repulsion. Calmly, firmly, I pulled his hands away and took a step back. The deepest betrayals are written in the silence between old promises. The space I created between us in that moment felt infinite and uncrossable. Chasm carved by deceit. The man I had loved was gone, replaced by this stranger on the floor. The importance of truth, I understood then, is not just in knowing it, but in having the courage to face the desolate landscape it leaves behind. The next morning, I awoke before the alarm. In truth, I had not slept at all. I spent the long hours lying with my back to Michael, listening to each of his breaths. The sound that for 40 years had been my lullaby now felt like a violation, a false and hollow rhythm in the dark. But when the first gray light touched the window, I rose in silence. I put on the familiar uniform of a wife and mother-in-law, just as I had every day for decades. I went downstairs to the kitchen. I fried eggs, brewed a pot of strong Arabica coffee, and cut a watermelon into neat, perfect cubes. The routine was a lifeline, each motion a stitch holding my breaking world together. The aroma of coffee, once a beloved scent, now felt bitter and accusing. Michael came down, his eyes swollen and red. He looked at me with a silent, pitiful plea. I did not meet his gaze. I simply placed his plate on the table with a soft, definitive clack. Thomas and Clara followed. Our son had the weary look of a writer who'd been up late with his thoughts. But Clara was radiant, fresh as a dew-covered flower. She was utterly unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred in the night. She even had the audacity to be affectionate. "Daddy," she said, holding out an apple to Michael. "You peel these so perfectly. Would you mind?" She called him Daddy with a sickening sweetness. Michael flinched, then took the fruit and the knife with clumsy hands. I watched, my knuckles white around the handle of a butter knife. I exerted a superhuman effort to keep my face a placid mask, to not scream, to not overturn the table of lies we were all sitting at. After that agonizing meal, Michael fled to his clinic. Thomas left for a meeting at his publisher's. The house emptied. Clara turned to me, all smiles. "Mom, I'm meeting some friends to look at maternity clothes. I won't be long." She even blew me a casual kiss before floating out the door. The front door closed with a soft click. The house settled into a deep silence. But it was not peace. It was the silence of a stage after the actors have exited, leaving only the set and the hidden truths. This was my moment. When you are alone in the home you build, what do the walls whisper? Stories of love or of secrets? I took a steadying breath and climbed the stairs to Thomas and Clara's room. As I opened the door, a wave of cloyingly sweet perfume hit me, an artificial scent. Much like the woman who wore it. Under the guise of tidying, I began to clean. I changed the sheets, dusted the dresser laden with expensive creams and makeup. My eyes, however, were not those of a homemaker, but of a hunter. My mother's intuition, honed over 60 years, guided me to the most intimate places. I opened the wardrobe, sifted through piles of soft sweaters and dresses. Nothing. I pulled out drawers, feeling beneath stacks of silken underthings. Still nothing. Frustration began to knot in my chest. Was I wrong? Was I becoming the paranoid old woman she perhaps thought I was? Finally, almost as an afterthought, I picked up Clara's pillow to fluff it. But as I lifted it, I felt a hard, rectangular bulge within the stuffing. It was not feathers. My heart began a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. With trembling hands, I laid the pillow down. My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, found the hidden zipper. I reached inside the cool, soft filling, and my fingertips brushed against smooth leather. I pulled it out. It was a small notebook, bound in dark brown leather, the kind one might use for daily lists. It looked utterly ordinary, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, that it held an abyss. A family's strength is tested not by its joys, but by the secrets it uncovers. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of the book immense in my hands. This was no simple diary. Opening it would mean stepping into the dark blueprint of my family's destruction. I took one more breath and turned the first page. Clara's handwriting was neat, stylized, deceptively elegant, but the words she had penned were not grocery lists or baby names. They were a cold, calculated blueprint for a betrayal. I turned the pages, each one a deeper descent into a chilling reality. Phase 1. Get close to Michael, the respectable doctor, lonely beneath the surface, an older wife, a distant son. He thrives on admiration, a few carefully placed compliments, a touch of vulnerability. It will be simple. My breath hitched. She had seen the cracks in our family before I had. Breaking point achieved. But now he is getting fearful, coward, thinks he can end this? Unacceptable. Plan B. Shift focus to Thomas, the gentle, trusting fool. One evening, a few too many drinks enough to create plausible doubt. Enter the family through the front door. Stay close to Michael. Keep what is mine. The words blurred for a moment. My son, my kind and creative Thomas. Reduced in her notes to the gentle, trusting fool, a wave of nausea rose in my throat. To do, ensure Michael's silence. The photographs from the hotel are insurance. He will not risk his pristine reputation. And Mary, dear, Knave Mary, a few tears. a story of being abandoned, and she will welcome me with open arms. Have you ever seen your own kindness reflected back at you, not as gratitude, but as a weakness to be exploited? The entry ended with a line that stole the air from the room. Mary is so gullible. She will believe anything that protects her idea of family. A dry, soundless sob shook my frame. She had seen me not as a person, but as a prop, a gullible old woman in her twisted play. The dizziness of shock was quickly replaced by a freezing, clarifying rage. But reason held me. I could not fall apart here now. With deliberate care, I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. My hands still trembled, but I forced them steady. I began to photograph every page, every damning word. The soft click of the camera was the only sound in the room, each one etching her cruelty into a digital record. This was no longer just a secret. It was evidence, a weapon. When I was certain I had captured everything, I returned the notebook to its hiding place inside the pillow, zipped it shut, and smoothed the fabric until it looked undisturbed. I stood up, the small phone feeling like the heaviest object I had ever carried. I had a part of the truth now, a glimpse into the machinery of the deception, but I knew it wasn't enough. A notebook could be dismissed as fantasy or worse, as something I had fabricated. Clara was cunning. She would cry. She would claim I was a jealous mother-in-law trying to break up her marriage. In a battle of her tears against my word, I feared I would lose. No, I needed something irrefutable. A truth written not in ink, but in blood. A truth that science could not argue with. I needed to know, beyond any doubt, who the father of that child was. The answer was clear, and it led me to the only person outside this house I felt I could still trust. Jessica. She was more than the nurse at Michael's clinic. She was like a niece to me, a young woman we had helped years ago when she had nowhere to turn. She owed Michael her career. She owed me her friendship. I went to the living room, sat on the sofa Michael had given me for our 30th anniversary, and made the call. Her cheerful hello, and Mary, was a stark contrast to the darkness swirling inside me. Jessica, I said, keeping my voice as even as I could. Could you meet me at the corner cafe? There is something I need to ask you. It's important. The weight of my voice must have been palpable. Because she agreed without hesitation, the trap was no longer just laid. I was beginning to arm it. The corner cafe was tucked away behind a lush bougainvillea vine, a quiet, discreet spot I had chosen for its privacy. I arrived first, choosing a table in the back where the light was soft and the shadows deep. I clutched my teacup, the warmth doing little to melt the cold dread that had taken root in my bones. Jessica arrived with her usual bright smile, her braid swinging. She kissed my cheek. Aunt Mary, it's so good to see you. How are the baby preparations coming along? Her innocent question was a knife twist. Seeing the genuine care in her eyes, I felt a profound sorrow. I was about to pull this good, kind soul into the filthy undertow of my family's ruin. I didn't have the luxury for small talk. I reached across the table and took her small, capable hand in mine. My voice, when I found it, was low and grave. Jessica, first, I must apologize. What I'm about to ask you, it goes against every professional rule you have, but I have no one else to turn to. Her smile faded, replaced by concerned confusion. I looked into her eyes and began to tell a version of the truth, a version that protected, for the moment, the very worst of it. Do you remember when we first met? I asked quietly. You were working 2 jobs, cleaning tables after that man stole your deposit. You had such determination in your eyes. I squeezed her hand. Michael gave you a chance. He taught you, and I have always thought of you as family. I will never forget what you both did for me, Jessica whispered, her eyes glistening. Never. When you ask for help, do you offer the whole, painful truth, or just the piece someone can safely carry? That's why I dare to ask this, I continued, my voice cracking with a desperation I could no longer hide. I have reason to believe, a terrible reason, that the baby Clara carries is not my Thomas's. She is deceiving him, Jessica. She is deceiving my whole family. Jessica's face went pale. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She knew Clara. She had always spoken of her as sweet, charming. I leaned in closer, my gaze holding hers with the intensity of a drowning woman. At her next appointment, there will be blood drawn. I need you, I am begging you, to secretly save one small tube for me, just one, after the clinic has taken what it needs. Can you do that? The conflict that washed over her face was a painful thing to witness. I was asking her to violate her ethics, to risk her career, the license she'd worked so hard for. She knew the magnitude of what I was asking. The silence between us stretched, filled only by the hum of the coffee machine. Then, she looked at my face, at the deep lines of worry etched there, at the tears I could no longer hold back. She saw the mother, not the conspirator. Her expression softened, then firmed with resolve. I owe you my life, and Mary, she said, her voice firm yet gentle. I will help you. Trust me. Relief, so profound it was almost a pain itself, flooded through me. I thanked her through my tears, a torrent of gratitude for this single thread of hope. For the first time in days, the crushing weight on my chest lightened just a fraction. I was no longer fighting in complete darkness. I had an ally. On the drive home, the world outside the car window seemed a little less hostile. The plan was in motion, but the hardest part, the waiting, was just beginning. And the most delicate part, gathering the evidence from within my own home, was yet to come. I had to move carefully, like a gardener walking through a bed of sleeping snakes, to get what I needed without waking them. That night, after the last light under Thomas's study door had gone out and the house hummed with the deep silence of sleep, I began my grim harvest. The plan was simple, yet each step felt like a theft, not of objects, but of trust, of a past that was now gone forever. First, Michael's office. I entered under the thin pretense of looking for an old gardening book. His desk lamp was still on, casting a warm, familiar pool of light over an open medical journal. His silver hairbrush lay neatly beside it, a few gray and white hairs caught in its bristles. My fingers, which had once stroked that hair with affection, now plucked the strands with clinical detachment. I placed them into a small, labeled plastic bag. Michael, what parts of ourselves do we leave behind in the places we once felt safest? Is it love, or is it evidence? Next, my son's room. The door was slightly ajar. Thomas had fallen asleep at his desk, his head nestled in the crook of his arm, surrounded by towers of manuscript pages. The sight of him, so peaceful and unknowing, was a physical ache in my heart. I moved like a ghost, my breath held. He had a habit of hugging a pillow to his chest while thinking. There, caught in the fabric, were several strands of his dark hair. I collected them with infinite care, as if afraid the very act of taking them might wake him and shatter his innocent world. Into a second bag they went. Thomas, back in my own room, with the door locked, I laid the two bags side by side on my dressing table. They looked so innocent, just bits of hair, yet they held the potential to confirm a nightmare or, against all odds, to offer a miracle. I stored them in the bottom of my lingerie drawer, beneath a stack of soft sweaters, a hiding place no one would think to look. The trap was now fully set. The bait, Clara's own blood, which Jessica would procure, was the final piece. All that was left was the agonizing wait, a wait measured not in days, but in the slow, painful ticks of a clock in a house that no longer felt like a home. The 2 weeks that followed were an exercise in theatrical endurance. Every day was a performance where I was both lead actress and director, my own heart the stage. I played the part of the doting mother-in-law with frightening dedication. I woke early to prepare Clara's favorite breakfasts. I urged glasses of milk on her, asked about her sleep, and even began to knit a pair of tiny, cream-colored booties. But with every stitch, my hands trembled. I wasn't knitting wool. I was weaving a faud of normalcy, a blanket of lies to lull her into security until the moment of truth arrived. Michael moved through the house like a phantom, weighted by a guilt so palpable it seemed to stain the air. He tried, in his clumsy way, to bridge the chasm. A bouquet of roses, a box of my favorite pastries, gifts that now felt like tombstones for our dead marriage. I accepted them with silence or a curt thank you, the gulf between us now an ocean. Then, one morning, as I stood at the kitchen sink, my phone vibrated softly in my apron pocket. A single message from Jessica. I have it. In your mailbox in the old glasses case. Be careful. My heart, which had been beating a slow, heavy dirge, suddenly hammered against my ribs. The moment was here. The past leaves its traces not in dust, but in the fragments we choose to keep. I wiped my hands on my apron, the dishwater suddenly feeling trivial. Trying to move with a casual slowness I did not feel. I walked to the front door and outside, as if merely checking for the morning mail. The air was cool. The mailbox, a simple green box at the end of the path, seemed to hold my family's future. Inside, nestled among bland envelopes for utilities and catalogs, was an old, hard glasses case. I retrieved it, and its unexpected weight sent a jolt through me. It felt heavy with consequence. Clutching it to my chest, I returned to the house, my footsteps measured and quiet on the gravel. In the sanctuary of my locked room, I sat on the edge of the bed. With trembling hands, I opened the case. Inside, carefully cushioned by thick cotton batting, was a small glass tube. It held a dark, rich crimson liquid, Clara's blood, the final piece of evidence. I stared at it, this vile and precious thing, the physical truth of her body now in my hands. How far would you go to protect your child? Would you cross lines you once thought sacred? I knew I could not have it tested here in New York. Michael was too well connected. In the medical community, a single question, a casual remark, and my entire fragile plan would collapse like a house of cards. I needed distance. A name surfaced in my mind. Philadelphia. An old college friend, Eleanor, lived there. It was the perfect cover. The next morning, over breakfast, I made my announcement with a calm I had practiced in the mirror. I think I'll drive to Philadelphia today. I promised Eleanor a visit months ago, and I could use the change of scenery. No one objected. Michael merely nodded, lost in his own guilt. Clara smiled absently. Thomas wished me a good trip, so I went on a journey. In the passenger seat of my car, inside my sensible handbag, was a small refrigerated lunchbox. Within it, wrapped like a sacred and terrible relic, were the 3 samples, 2 bags of hair, and 1 tube of blood. The 4-hour drive was a blur of highway lines and swirling thoughts. I had researched a private lab in Philadelphia, one praised online for its discretion and accuracy. It was tucked away in a quiet business park, anonymous and clinical. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of clean linen. I approached the receptionist, my heart a frantic bird in my chest. I'd like a paternity test, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. A prenatal one. I gave a false name, Eleanor Gray, when asked the relationship. I swallowed the bitter lie. I need to confirm. For my daughter, she's caught between 2 possibilities. The truth that the 2 possibilities were my husband and my son remained. A silent scream inside me. I paid in cash, leaving no digital trail, and requested the results be sent only to a private email address I had created for this sole purpose. The woman behind the desk was professional, detached. She saw just another worried grandmother. She had no idea she was handling the ingredients of an impending detonation. The drive back was longer, heavier. The 10 days of waiting that followed were a special kind of torment. I moved through my routines, watering my cactus garden, preparing meals, knitting, but I was a shell. Every ping from my phone, every chime from the computer, made my breath catch. The anticipation was a physical presence, a constant, low hum of dread. Then, one quiet afternoon, as I was carefully tending to a stubborn, prickly pear, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Not a call, an email alert. I pulled it out. The sender was the lab. The subject line was stark and clear. Genetic analysis report case #73 for B. The world narrowed to that line of text. The watering can slipped from my hand, soaking the earth at my feet. I didn't care. All the waiting, the scheming, the heartbreak, it all led to this moment, waiting in my inbox. The final truth was a click away. The answer that would either shatter what was left of us, or condemn us to a different kind of hell, had finally arrived. I ran into the house, my gardening gloves forgotten, my hands still caked with soil. I went straight to the dining table where my laptop sat, a silent gatekeeper to my future. My fingers, clumsy and slick with sweat, fumbled with the password. Once, twice, the third time, it finally took. There it was, the email. I clicked the attached PDF file. It opened to a page filled with dense scientific tables, graphs, and terminology I didn't understand. My eyes didn't linger on any of it. They scanned desperately, flying over the numbers, searching for the only lines that mattered. The conclusion. The first line found its target. Fetal sample compared to alleged father. 1 Matthew Miller. 0.0% compatibility. Paternity excluded. A cold, expected confirmation. I had already known this in my soul. It was the next line I needed to see. My eyes dropped down. Fetal sample compared to alleged father. 2 Robert Miller. 0.0% compatibility. Paternity excluded. I stopped breathing. I read it again and again. The numbers didn't change. 0.0%, not his, not Michael's either. For a long moment, there was only a vast roaring silence in my head. All my assumptions, my furious certainty, my devastating confrontation. With Michael, it had all been built on a foundational truth I believed was rock solid, that the child was his. But that foundation wasn't rock. It was sand, and it had just been washed away by a cold, clinical tide. What do you do when the lie you uncovered was itself hiding a deeper, more terrible lie? Then, a sound escaped me, a dry, brittle laugh that echoed in the quiet kitchen. It was a laugh of absolute, absurd horror. I laughed at the sheer, monstrous scale of Clara's deception. She hadn't just trapped one man, or even two. She had woven a web so complex, with lies nested inside lies, that she had fooled everyone, including, it seemed, herself about who the father truly was. She was pregnant by a third, unknown man, and had used that pregnancy as a weapon to manipulate my husband and ensnare my son. My laughter died, leaving a chilling clarity in its wake. The fury I had felt toward Michael morphed, mixing with a terrifying pity for my son and a cold, sharp focus. Clara wasn't just a betrayer, she was a strategist of chaos, and I had just obtained her complete undoing. I had everything now, not just one piece of evidence, but a chain of irrefutable proof. The notebook of her schemes, the timeline of the ultrasound, and now this DNA report, the unassailable truth of science. The farce had reached its final act. It was time to end it. I chose the moment with the precision of a director setting the final scene. I knew Thomas had a late meeting with his publisher. Michael had his monthly medical society dinner, an engagement he would not miss. The house would be ours alone. 2 women, 1 truth. That evening, after Michael's car disappeared down the street, I prepared a pot of chamomile tea. Its gentle herbal scent was an anchor. Then, I called upstairs, my voice deliberately light. Clara, could you come down? I'd like your thoughts on the nursery colors. A few moments later, she descended, a picture of serene motherhood, holding a glass of warm milk. She sat on the sofa across from me, smiling that innocent smile. I was thinking a soft sage green, Mom. It's so calming for a baby's mind. I let her talk. I let her paint her beautiful fall's future. I nodded, sipping my tea, waiting for her to finish her performance. When she finally paused, I didn't speak. In the heavy silence, I began to place my exhibits on the glass coffee table between us, one by one. First, my phone, screen lit with the photographed page from her leather notebook. The phrase "Mary is so gullible" was clearly visible. Clara's smile faltered, confusion clouding her eyes. Next, I placed the ultrasound sheet beside it, my finger resting on the typed gestational age, 12 weeks, for days. Her breath hitched. The glass of milk in her hand trembled. Finally, I laid down the printed DNA report. With a steady hand, I had circled the 2 critical lines in stark red ink. I pushed the paper toward her. She looked down. All the color drained from her face. The performance was over. The most dangerous prisons are built not with bars, but with the lies we choose to believe. The glass of milk fell from Clara's hand. It hit the Persian rug with a dull thud, the white liquid spreading in an ugly, soaking stain. For a moment, she just stared at the evidence arrayed before her, her body rigid with shock. Then, her eyes snapped to mine, wide with a fear that quickly burned into something darker. You were spying on me, she whispered, her voice breaking. But the vulnerability lasted only a second. As the full weight of her exposure settled, her true face emerged. The innocence peeled away, revealing raw defiance. To my astonishment, she let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Fine, since you know everything, I don't have to pretend anymore. Her voice was cold, edged with venom. She stood up, her body trembling not with fear, but with a furious energy. Yes, the baby isn't your precious son's, it's your husband's, it's Michael's. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her eyes blazing with hatred. And what will you do now, Run and tell Thomas that his father slept with his wife? Broadcast the great Castillo family scandal to the world? Let's see who ends up more humiliated when this is over. Let's see your perfect family shatter then. I remained seated, my back straight, my hands resting calmly on the arms of my chair. I looked at her not with the rage she expected, but with a profound, weary pity. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my chamomile tea, the warmth a steadying presence. Michael confessed everything to me weeks ago. Clara, I said, my voice serene and clear. Every sordid detail. Her arrogant sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. She hadn't expected that. I set my cup down softly on the table. But there is something you seem to have forgotten. Or perhaps you never knew. I leaned forward slightly, holding her gaze, which was now beginning to flicker with doubt. Look at the test result again. Look carefully. What is the true cost of a lie? Is it the moment it's told, or the moment it collapses under the weight of a truth you never saw coming? I tapped the paper with the red circles. This baby is not Michael's either. The science is unequivocal. 0%. I let the words hang in the thick air between us. While you were so busy playing your games with a father and his son, you seem to have lost track of who else might be involved. I suggest you dedicate your time to finding the real father of your child. My final sentence fell like a judge's gavel, the hardened defiance in Clara's expression shattered completely. The bravado drained away, leaving behind only a hollow, bewildered confusion. Her knees seemed to buckle. She sank back onto the sofa as if her strings had been cut, her gaze empty and fixed on the expanding milk stain. On the rug, a stain that mirrored the ruin of her plans. I said nothing more. I had no more words for her. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own steady heartbeat. After several long minutes, Clara slowly dragged herself up from the couch. Without a glance in my direction, she moved like a sleepwalker toward the stairs, a defeated silhouette disappearing into the shadows of the hall. I waited until I heard her bedroom door click shut. Then, I rose. I went to the kitchen, fetched a clean rag and a bucket of warm water, and returned to the living room. I knelt on the floor beside the ruined rug. The milk had seeped deep, a dirty white blot on the intricate patterns. I began to scrub, not with anger, but with a sad, determined diligence. This mess, this tangible evidence of the poison spilled in my home, would not remain. I would clean it myself. As I worked, the house settled into an eerie, waiting silence. The storm of the confrontation had passed, but the heavier storm, the one involving my son, was still on the horizon. I had to be the one to tell him. I couldn't let him hear this poisoned version from her lips, or from a father too cowardly to speak. A lie wrapped in a family's love becomes a weapon. The truth, however painful, is the only key to disarming it. The stain was stubborn. I scrubbed until my knees ached and the rug's pattern began to re-emerge from the milky film. The physical labor was a blessing. It gave my mind a simple, single task to focus on, a respite from the emotional whirlpool. When I was done, I prepared a fresh pot of chamomile tea and sat in the living room under the soft, glow of a single lamp. Waiting in the quiet darkness. Nearly at midnight, I heard the familiar purr of Michael's sedan pulling into the garage. The key turned in the lock, the door opened and closed. His footsteps were hesitant in the foyer. He stepped into the living room and saw me sitting there, a lone figure in the dim light. He stopped. In the shadows, I could see his face clearly. He looked at my expression cold, firm, utterly resolved, and he understood. Everything had come to an end. "Did you speak with her?" he asked, his voice a low rasp of weariness and dread. I didn't answer with words. I simply nodded once. He let out a heavy, shuddering sigh, as if expelling the last of his spirit. He didn't dare come closer. He sank into an armchair on the far side of the room, a separate island in the sea of our shared history. He bowed his head, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. We sat like that for a long time, to silent monuments in a museum of a dead marriage, separated by a canyon of betrayal so wide no bridge could ever span it. Do secrets grow heavier in the telling, or in the silent spaces between two people who have run out of words? The next morning, before the sun had fully risen and before Thomas stirred, I went to the kitchen and made the most important call of my life. I dialed Margaret. She had been my closest friend since our university days, a fiercely intelligent woman who had become one of the city's most formidable family lawyers. I needed her sharp mind now, not her comforting shoulder. When she answered, her voice was bright with sleep. "Mary, is everything all right?" And I told her everything, holding back nothing. Not the notebook, not the DNA results, and not Michael's shameful, pivotal role in the deception. As the full, ugly truth poured out, the tears I had bottled up for weeks finally broke free. I wept quietly into the phone, my shoulders shaking. On the other end, Margaret listened. No interruptions, just the occasional soft, shocked inhalation. When my voice finally trailed off into hiccuping silence, she didn't offer platitudes. Her voice was firm, clear, and full of a protective ferocity I felt resonate in my bones. "Mary, you have endured more than enough. Send me all the evidence. Every scan, every photo, every report. I will be at your house this afternoon." Hanging up, I felt a shift. The unbearable weight I had been carrying alone was now shared, distributed onto the capable shoulders of a friend and a professional. A sliver of strength returned to me. I gathered the digital files, the photos of the notebook, the ultrasound, the lab results, and sent them to her. The act felt like passing a baton in a terrible race. Later that afternoon, Thomas returned from the publishing house. He came in with a lightness in his step, a genuine smile on his face. "Mom, they loved the new outline. We're moving forward with a 2-book contract." The pure, undiluted joy in his eyes was a beautiful, fragile thing. Seeing it, I felt a knot of grief and dread tighten in my chest. How could I be the one to extinguish that light? But I had to. He could not live one more day in that woman's fabricated world. "That's wonderful, darling," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Please, sit down. There's something we need to talk about. It's about Clara and about our family." The smile faded from his face, replaced by innocent concern. He sat at the kitchen table, where I had already set out a pot of tea. I had also insisted Michael be present. He sat at the head of the table, a silent, pale sentinel of guilt. I took a deep breath, my hands steadying themselves on the back of a chair. The hardest part of the battle was now beginning. The truth does not ask for permission to enter. It arrives, and we must choose whether to bar the door or to let it rebuild the house. "Please, just look," I said to my son, my voice a gentle but firm guide. I turned the tablet toward him. On the screen was the first piece of evidence, a photograph of the page from Clara's leather-bound notebook, her meticulous handwriting spelling out her cruel calculations. I watched his face as his eyes scanned the words. The initial confusion, the slow dawning of comprehension, the flicker of disbelief. He read the phrase "the gentle, trusting fool" meant for him, and his breath caught. What is this?" he whispered. "It's her plan, Thomas," I said softly. "From the beginning." Next, I showed him the ultrasound. My finger pointed to the typed gestational age. 12 weeks and 4 days, I said. David's party was 8 weeks ago. The math, it doesn't add up. It never did. He stared at the numbers, his mind working, trying to find another explanation, another variable. The confusion in his eyes deepened into a pained struggle. How does the mind protect the heart? By rationalizing, by denying, by clinging to the familiar story until the very last possible second. Finally, I brought up the DNA test report. I had highlighted the two critical lines. This is the truth, son, the scientific truth. I had tests done. I slid the tablet closer. Look at the conclusion. His eyes dropped to the screen. He read the first line, 0.0% compatibility, paternity excluded. His jaw tightened. Then his gaze moved to the second line, the one concerning Michael. 0.0% compatibility, paternity excluded. For a moment, there was absolute stillness. The information was too vast, too catastrophic, to process all at once. I saw the sequence of pain move across his face like shadows. Surprise, deep confusion, then a shock so profound it seemed to hollow him out from the inside. The light in his eyes, the joyful light from his news just minutes before guttered and died. He didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He simply folded. His head dropped forward onto the table with a soft, heavy thud. His shoulders, which had always carried his dreams so lightly, began to shake. Then a sound emerged, a low, guttural, heartbreaking moan that broke into ragged, helpless sobs. He slid from his chair to his knees on the floor, clutching his head as if it might split open. I loved her, he wept, the words torn from him. I trusted her. I'm such a fool, such a blind, stupid fool. His pain was a physical force in the room. It was the sound of his entire world, the future he had envisioned, the love he had believed in collapsing into dust. I moved instantly. I knelt on the hard floor beside him and wrapped my arms around his trembling frame. I pulled him into my chest, holding him as I had when he was a small boy who had fallen off his bike. His tears soaked through my blouse. Michael made a move as if to approach, to offer some pathetic semblance of comfort. I looked up and caught his eye. With a single, sharp shake of my head and a raised hand, I stopped him cold. Not you. You do not get to comfort him. Not now. Not ever for this. He retreated, shrinking back into his chair. I held my son and rocked him gently. I whispered into his hair, the only words that mattered now. It was not your fault, Thomas. Listen to me. It was never your fault. Your only sin was having a good and trusting heart. The fault lies with those who saw that goodness and decided to weaponize it. His sobs eventually subsided into shuddering breaths, the storm of initial agony passing, leaving him exhausted and empty in my arms. The truth had done its brutal work. The lie was dead. Now, we had to figure out how to live in the wreckage. A family's true foundation is poured not during the celebrations, but in the quiet aftermath of the storm. The following day, Margaret arrived not as my comforting friend, but as a poised and purposeful attorney, a leather-bound folder under her arm. She greeted me with a firm, understanding squeeze of my hand before turning her attention to the somber atmosphere of the home. Thomas emerged from his room. The boyish light was gone from his eyes, replaced by a somber, weathered determination. He had aged overnight. His gaze, though red-rimmed from tears, was clear and direct when he looked at Margaret. "Hello, Thomas," she said, her voice professional yet kind. "Your mother has explained the situation. I am so sorry for what you've been put through." She placed the folder on the kitchen table, the sound definitive. "My job now is to help you navigate what comes next, as cleanly and fairly as the law allows." She opened the folder. Inside were the divorce papers. She didn't cushion the moment with platitudes. She simply explained the terms, the immediate legal separation, the temporary orders. Thomas listened, nodding slowly. The man who got lost in fictional mysteries was now confronting the most brutal plot twist of his own life with a stark, painful clarity. "Where do I sign?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. He took the pen Margaret offered, without a moment's hesitation. He put his signature on the dotted line, the final stroke severing the legal tie to the woman who had betrayed him. It was an act not of anger, but of profound self-preservation, a boundary drawn in ink where one had been obliterated in his heart. Later that day, with the temporary restraining order in hand, court officers arrived to ensure Clara's departure. The angelic mask was gone for good. Faced with the irreversible reality, her composure shattered into splinters of fury. She screamed, she hurled insults, she cursed our family name and vowed to drag our reputation through the mud. But her threats now fell on deaf ears. They were the last, desperate barks of a cornered animal, powerless against the cold, documented truth we now possessed. She was given 24 hours to gather her belongings and leave. We watched from the window as she was driven away, leaving behind only the lingering, cloying scent of her perfume, and a pile of ashes, where a future had once seemed to promise joy. Margaret, acting on behalf of our family, then filed a civil suit against Clara for fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and attempted marital asset manipulation. The legal wheels began to turn with a grim, efficient momentum. Can justice ever truly mend a broken heart, or does it simply draw a line in the sand, allowing the healing to begin on new ground? The trial, when it came, was swift. The evidence was overwhelming and indisputable. The handwritten plan, the DNA results, and even Michael's own testimony, given in a hollow, shame-filled monotony. Clara's defense crumbled. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation and a 5-year restraining order prohibiting any contact with any member of our family. The final ruling from the family court was perhaps the most poignant. Detail: once born, the child would be placed in the custody of Clara's own mother, the court having determined Clara lacked the emotional stability and moral integrity necessary for parenthood. And just like that, she was erased from our daily lives. The house felt different, not just quiet, but emptied. A toxic presence had been removed, but the space it left behind was not peace. It was a void, a silence heavy with memory and pain. In the months that followed, we were like survivors on separate rafts in a wide, calm sea after a hurricane. Thomas retreated into his study. For days and nights, the only sound from behind his door was the frantic, relentless tapping of keyboard keys. He wasn't just writing, he was exercising. The relationship between Michael and me remained a frozen tundra. We shared a roof, a bed, a history, but the man I had married was a ghost to me. His ultimate betrayal orchestrating his own son's humiliation was a canyon between us. I could see no way across. I didn't know if forgiveness was even a word that applied anymore, or if some fractures are simply too deep to ever mend. Justice closes the ledger on the crime, but the heart keeps its own, more complicated accounting. Time, they say, heals all wounds. But in those first heavy months, time felt less like a healer and more like a slow, patient gardener, turning over the scorched earth of our lives, one painful inch at a time. The house remained too large, its silence a presence all its own. Then, one evening, as I sat alone on the back porch watching the fireflies blink over the garden, I heard the soft click of the screen door. Michael stepped out. In his hands were 2 mugs. He didn't sit in the adjacent chair, our old companionable spot. He stood a respectful few feet away, holding one out to me. "I thought you might like some tea," he said, his voice rough with a weariness that had become permanent. I accepted it with a silent nod. He remained standing, looking out at the darkening yard. "Mary," he began, the name sounding like a confession itself. "I know asking for forgiveness is pointless. I don't dare beg for it. But I want you to know, I will spend every day I have left trying to atone. To you and to Thomas." It wasn't a grand speech. It was simple, heavy, and devoid of the excuses that had once filled his mouth. For the first time, it sounded like truth. I didn't reply. I took a sip of the tea, but my silence this time was not a wall. It was a space, and into that space, he began to place small, quiet actions. A few days later, I came into the sunroom to find a new potted cactus on the windowsill, its tough green body promising resilience. He'd remembered I admired them. Another morning, I found he had clumsily attempted to make breakfast. The eggs were over-scrambled, the toast slightly burnt, but the table was set. They were not gestures of a husband seeking romance, but of a profoundly guilty soul learning the language of service. Can a relationship broken to its foundation be rebuilt into something new? Or does it simply become a different structure on the same land? Thomas, meanwhile, remained in his fortress of words. The frantic typing gradually softened into a steady, rhythmic cadence. It was no longer the sound of escape, but of construction. He was building something from the rubble. Then, one bright afternoon, the door to his study, which had been closed for so long, opened. He emerged, thinner, quieter, but with a new clarity in his eyes. In his hands was a thick ream of paper. "I finished it, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He handed me the manuscript. The title page read, "The Silent Garden." "It's for you," he said simply. I understood. It was his testimony, his processing, his art born from agony. He had transformed our family's poison into a story, a mystery. Yes, but one pulsing with the raw truths of trust, betrayal, and the painful road back to self. Little by little, life began to seep back in. Thomas started taking walks again. He met an old friend for coffee. He mentioned an idea for a new book, one not born of pain but of curiosity. The shell around him was cracking, revealing not the broken boy from the kitchen floor, but a man who had stared into an abyss and was slowly walking back from its edge. Michael and I began to talk, not about the past, not yet, but about the hydrangeas that weren't blooming, about a documentary we'd both seen, about a book I was reading. Our conversations were like two people relearning a forgotten dialect, cautious and simple. The love we had known was gone, a beautiful burned-down house. But on its foundation, we were tentatively, silently, arranging to chairs. Not together, but side by side, looking out at the same horizon. Healing is not the absence of scars, but the quiet courage to tend a new garden around them. Now, I sit here on this porch, the same place where I first felt my world break apart. The evening sun filters through the maple leaves, dappling the floorboards with liquid gold. In my hands, I hold a well-worn copy of Thomas's published novel, The Silent Garden. It became a quiet success, praised not just for its mystery, but for its profound understanding of the human heart. He transformed our pain into something that helps others feel less alone. That is his magic. From inside the house, I hear it, the steady, rhythmic tapping of keyboard keys. It is no longer the frantic sound of escape I heard in those dark months. Now, it is the heartbeat of our home, the sound of creation, of a life moving forward, one word at a time. Michael is inside, reading the paper. Later, we might share a simple supper. We are learning. The path forward is not one of grand passion, but of quiet companionship, of two people tending to the same quiet life, mindful of the fault line that runs beneath it but choosing to walk gently nonetheless. The storm has long passed. My family carries scars, deep ones that will never fully fade. I see them in Thomas's sometimes too thoughtful gaze, in the careful space Michael still keeps, in the way I sometimes startle at a whispered word. But we survived. More than that, we are, in our own way, rebuilding. Thomas has found his path in the truth of his own words. Michael and I are learning to navigate a new, honest map of our marriage. And I am no longer the woman who believed every story told with a tear. I am a mother who learned to fight for her son with a strength she never knew she possessed. I am a woman who learned that peace is not found by ignoring the cracks in the foundation, but by mustering the courage to inspect them. No matter what terrifying truth you might find, what story is your life telling? And if you listen to the quietest whispers within it, what truth would you hear? As the last light of day fades, I understand this. Life is not a simple novel with guaranteed happy endings. Sometimes those we trust most deeply are the ones who hold the sharpest knives. But I have also learned that the truth, however brutal, is the most powerful tool we have. It is the compass that can guide you out of the darkest labyrinth of lies. Stand in your truth, protect your own, and remember, the greatest strength is often born in the silent moments after the world falls apart. Thank you for listening to my story. This is Grandma's last letter, reminding you that your story, with all its chapters of joy and sorrow, matters. If this resonated with you, please give this video a like. It helps our community of thoughtful viewers grow. And I'd love to know in the comments, what is one lesson life has written on your heart?